I take yours as the two red ones, so you only have two. Oh my. Okay, go ahead.
Good evening. I'm Paul.
Jim with that.
This operations work group meeting to order dated dated June 9th, 2020. We have no public speakers today, so moving on to the approval of minutes. I move to approve the minutes from the operations work group meeting dated May 12th, 2025. Second, board member Muldrow. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. All right, so just a brief overview for the discussion tonight. We will receive what the administration agreed to with regard to the handbook and updates. Have a referenda update and finally review the budget before our review the preliminary budget up to this point before our June vote for the summer. So take it away. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Chair Castro, members of the board, staff, and partners who are with us today. Thank you very much. We're going to go ahead and get started with 3 agenda items as board member Castro pointed out tonight. Let's begin with our strategic framework goals. You can find on the second slide, every child is on track to graduate ready for college, career, community. The district and school is a place where children, staff, and families thrive. 3 is African American children and youth excel in school. Our core values are next. Before we get started, again, as Chair Castro alluded to, we've got some great updates for you tonight, and we're going to begin with handbook updates, and I'm going to turn it over to Senior Executive Director of Human Resources, Jennifer Trendle.
Thank you, Dr. Gothard and Chairman Castro. We are here this evening to discuss and present to you our what we've done with our handbook committee this year. I have Angela Tesmer with me and also Rachel Carabell, who will speak a little bit later. We presented a memo in April after the operations group in March. There is a copy for every board member this evening. It shows the section and the addendum of what we discussed to that date, and we have a little bit more of an update this evening, and I'm going to turn it over to Angela.
Yeah, thank you. So this year we had increased participation and engagement of the subcommittees through our handbook process. And we received over 80 recommendations to enhance our handbook. We had great discussions throughout this last year. We reached consensus on 22 items. And we will be finalizing that consent memo and then getting that to you. We continue to build relationships, and we created framework and foundation for continued collaboration. So those were our achievements this year. Next slide, please. So here were the recommendations that the first column you see here, number of requests submitted. So for each section of the handbook, that's how we got to the 87, and that is what is reflected in that memo that you all received a copy of. And then we reached consensus on 22 items, and again, the numbers associated with the sections are listed there as well. Next slide. So the total investments for the consensus items that we discussed collaboratively is the cost of $55,000. That includes night differential increase and some other things. And then that will be presented for your approval at the regular board meeting on June 23rd. And then these handbook updates would be effective July 1.
So questions about the handbook process or any of the items that are in this memo? We do have a regular memo that will be coming to the board that shows all of the language changes. It will also have an appendix that shows the strike through. So it will be rather lengthy, but we wanted to make sure that you had all of that information. before you approve or not approve on June 23rd.
I think folks are reviewing the document.
And we did have a tracker where we, for each of the items. And each of the, was it the subgroups?
Subcommittees?
Prioritize them based on a scale of 1, 2, or 3.
Yes, that's correct. I feel like too, we've come a long way. In the last five years in making headway on handbook enhancements. So I'm really proud of the work that this group did.
Oh, yeah, board member Munster Falcon.
Thank you. Can you speak to the framework and foundation for community collaboration a little bit more?
Yeah, so what we did differently this year is we created these subcommittee groups. So elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, and then we had some other subcommittees as well. They came together and they came up with their requests or suggestions. And then we came together as a larger joint review committee and had very engaged conversations. And we just continue to have those conversations, even though like the consent memo is drafted and ready to come your way, like we're still talking with MTI and other.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Any further board member questions? Okay, well, we will have an opportunity to review these further at the meeting, I believe. Okay, so we'll have to digest these recommended changes and ask any further questions we may have.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Jennifer and Angela. Next, we are going to shift into our referendum update. Scott, I've been calling for Scott, what's your start date?
September 23rd, 24,
Yeah, so
25.
just a couple months before our vote and positive vote and jumping in with our partners and members of the board, Chair Castro, I think you'll see tonight the progress that's been made and just the quality of collaboration and making sure that we demonstrate to the community that not only are we appreciative of their work with the referendum approval, but we are doing great work in service of our kids, our staff, and our community. In tonight's update, you'll get a little bit of a 3D in motion overview of where things are at. So I'll turn it over to you, Scott, to introduce your guest tonight and to take us through a update on our referendum 2024.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Gothard, board members. As we all know, in November, we passed a historic referendum, a place for us to build and bring partners into our district to help having new spaces for our students, new opportunities to learn, also build flexibility for not only now, but also the future, to ensure medicine becomes that destination city. And with that process, we brought on owners reps to help us to act, think, and act and work as us to help collaborate and to bring that mission. And with that, I'll bring it out to bring it over to Kevin McGinty from Concord Group. He's our project executive leader for Concord Group and the process. And he'll bring and introduce the rest of our guests and where we go.
All right, good evening. My name is Kevin with the Concord Group. We are construction consultants, experts in design and construction. And while on paper, our project and job could be the same for any client, some clients really, we start to help guide them through the process, understanding what architects do, what contractors do. With other clients, they've done these projects before and have full-time staff of facilities like Madison. And then they go past $500 million referendum and add that much more work to their plate. And so a company like ours can help facilitate the process, work through some of the issues, and really start to provide clear communication to Scott and his team, kind of the issues, solutions, what are the options, the pros and cons, instead of having to do all the work through. And so the first step in that process is, what is the team? How do we build the team? And as soon as we were brought on, the team that was leading referendum prior had already put out the AE RFP. And we worked through the interviews for selecting our architects. followed by the contractors, and they're the two largest partners to bring on for this project. And in the interview process, make sure that the companies that come in are qualified to do education, construction, design, and are the experts. And within that, they come to and present in interviews. And that's where they really tell us, this is how they're gonna support the needs of the students. This is how they are gonna be part of our team. We already know they can do the work, but how are they gonna be Madison's team partner? And through the process, there was 3 clear winners, 1 architect, 2 contractors that just blew us away in their interview, their process, how they were committed to being team members. And since they've been brought on, it has been breakneck speed. There's some pretty impressive stats that you'll see here shortly. But first, Wes and Susan,
Right behind you.
sorry, we'll be starting to present the work to date, and I'm excited. There's a lot to see. You guys,
You want us to all go up there?
I think so.
Okay.
Whoever's presenting.
Just waiting, stay waiting, their newspaper. Thank you.
You can go to the next slide for us, please. You want us to go through this, Scott? Go ahead. All right, so tonight thank you for having us all this evening. My name is Wes Reynolds, principal with OPN Architects. I lead our Madison studio. Our office is just 2 blocks up the way, so stop in and say hello anytime you love it. You get to know everyone here even more. We're gonna be working with you for the next 5 years. It's been an absolute pleasure going through it. So Susan, Vicki, and I have the pleasure to update you on where we are today. Tonight, we're gonna just introduce the overall team. There's a lot of members that are working on your behalf and the school's behalf. So we want to see some, you can see some of those faces. We're gonna talk a little bit about timeline and the progress we've made. We're gonna walk you through a high level of the input we've got from the community and some feedback that Susan's gonna walk through that's obviously impacted. We're gonna share with you where we are on the programming and the overall kind of just start at the beginning of the budget where the contractors are leading that from our side, from their side. Talk about sustainability and get some thoughts of where we are, whether we've been getting feedback on that. And then what we're really excited about is the first 2 phase projects that we're going to show you the first round of concepts for floor plans, site plan, and design of the building where we are today. And then lastly, just share some next steps of how we continue to go forward, because this is our first presentation to you of many to come. And please stop us at any time. We want to answer as many questions as we can for you. We also have some places behind kind of each phase for you to ask. With that, if you could go to the next slide, please. Kevin, did you want to present this?
Yeah, so this is kind of a graphic depiction of what I was talking about a little bit before, where Madison is the hub. Madison is the entity that has the relationship with the architects. They have the relationship with Findorf and Vogel, our contractors, and the dotted lines from Concord to the entities are where we work and make suggestions, but the dash or the solid lines, that is Madison, that's the decision making. That is the bulk of the work. What should happen is a whole bunch more arrows that point everyone, because it is a lot of teamwork and collaboration and back and forth, and no contractual relationship, but the arrows that would go back and forth between OPN and Findorf and Vogel are probably the darkest lines you would see on this.
Ultimately, hopefully what you're hearing out of this is a great collaboration between all of us, and we're going to work on behalf of ultimately the students' futures. Go to the next slide, please.
All right, so what we're getting to is, it's not me. The last slide, I'm not Concord. I'm nowhere close to Concord. At the top is our COO, John Dugan, actively involved in these projects. We talk multiple times every week, get updates, work through where we're at status wise. And then next we have Josie, Anna, and Anna. Not to be too confusing, but one has 2 ends, one has 1, and they are all actively involved in this project, as is Curtis. Justin, Kathleen, and Sydney are part of our building performance services team and are involved in mechanical, electrical, plumbing design review, and more building function. And so this is our team. And this is a small part, there are more, yes.
Any individual team members fluid in adaptive design universal?
We will be talking.
Their team.
Yep, we will be talking about that definitely.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question. That it, okay. From our side, Opiate Architects, we are the lead designer for you. So we are the architects and interior designers. And then we partner with engineering firms that support us for mechanical, electrical, plumbing, civil design. So that's our other two partners across the top, JSP and IMEG. Those are all three firms centric to Madison. Work for you. And then, yes, again, maybe my face at the top, but I think I just get in everybody's way is my job, unfortunately. But I have privilege of getting, Susan's leading this project overall for our team. Vicky is the head planning K-12 planner and she's head of all our K-12 across all our studios. And then we have an amazing group behind us just supporting this project from the design or ultimately, yes, construction, building something. Go to the next slide. Aaron and Jade, you maybe want to quickly introduce your teams?
So Aaron's us from Findorf. We have Dave here as well. So a little bit different approaches from the slides here. So on Findorf's end, we're showing kind of the leadership group. We'll certainly have more people similar to Vogel, but Dave and myself are here representing Findorf and very excited to be on the team again.
And Jay Thompson, Vice President of Vogel Brothers, serving in a project executive role. And much like everyone else said, showed some of the team that'll be behind us, helping support the work and looking forward to the opportunity.
So we did want to show you maybe overall where we are in a schedule of kind of the beginning of this year till through the end of this year, ultimately till January of this year, where is a big focus of design. Maybe you might have heard from Scott or others that we've really spent the beginning of this year assessing all of the projects instead of just diving into phase one. The key of that was to start assessing the overall budget, making sure that the $507 million is used appropriately. We have some of those efforts going on currently with the CMs and Concord, evaluating all those things. And then right now we are in a mode of moving on to just focusing on the first two major projects of Sherman Shabazz and Blackhawk Gompers. And you'll see in each one of these, the blue is what you'll see tonight, kind of close to the end of that first round of design. The design is not done. If you look at these and say, hey, is that the exact building? No, these are still fancy cartoons, maybe how I could say it right now, right? It's gonna look done, it's gonna look like it. You're gonna ask us lots of questions of, well, is that brick really cream? We don't know, but we think it's brick so far, right? But we're excited about that, and it's a great part. As we move in then to the next phase, design development, which will be taken kind of till October 1st. That's where we really do start refining those pieces. We'll figure out maybe what the right bricks are. We'll talk about a lot of questions on the inside of the floor plans of where are our doors, where are entrances, maybe where are ADA accessible operators, all those kind of key details. Then after that, the contractor will do another round of pricing, making sure we're on budget, keeping this project going in the right direction. It'll move then into the yellow bars that you'll see, which is really the technical side of what we do, that big stack of drawings that goes out to the field. You know, back in the day, we would call it blueprints. It's all those drawings that say how the building goes together, maybe what door hardware is on those doors and all those details. We'll take the rest of that and we'll start delivering a set of phased sets of documents to the general contract or to the CMs that then they'll start pricing and ultimately start construction early next year. So extremely exciting times. We're looking forward to showing you what we have tonight. We go to the next. Then we also want to share kind of 3 tracks of input that we've been looking for from the community. At the top are our series of meetings we've been having from February really till about July. In the middle is really a focus that's been working on all the programming of the spaces. That's all the individual rooms, like this room. Do we need a conference room that sits X amount of people? What are all those spaces that we need into it? And really that's been a challenging piece that we'll go through, Vicky and others, of just how do we get this thing right sized? Because we got to ask a lot of really detailed, complicated questions, trying to look, 40 years into the future of what does this building need and how do we keep them very flexible for you with future education processes. And then lastly is engagement with the city of Madison, making sure they're being brought along, that they're again, good partners, and they've been fantastic to work with thus far. And we have an exciting presentation to them, to the UDC on Wednesday this evening, where we show their first, they see the same kind of content you're seeing this evening, and give for feedback of how we're going and other things they may want to see from transportation or fire department needs, so that we can meet their expectations, and again, get brought along and we make all that schedule move quickly and smoothly. Next slide. I mean, it's worth pausing. There'll be a bigger schedule. Keep going.
Yeah,
All
we'll go
right.
to the end of the first.
Sounds great.
All right, so as that schedule showed, in the last couple months, we've had a lot of engagement. We're trying to hear from all the lenses, all the stakeholder groups. The design team, we act as sponges. So, next slide. So part of the engagement is we get input from all these different parts and pieces. We want to make sure we hear from the staff. We want to make sure we hear from the facilities group, the community, the district, students. We also take time to do some benchmarking trips. And so a group of the district with ourselves went to visit a couple schools, both not exactly in Madison, but we actually took a day trip and went to see what some other school districts are doing in terms of what do those spaces look like, and how can we get input in terms as we think of through our programming. The other thing we want to make sure you understand is we also are making sure we're getting data like from demographics, from the financial people. We're working with our CMs, they're providing cost input. So we're getting all this information, not just from the people who will be in the school, but also from the community. As we want to hear from everybody's. So it's a lot of time. And so in the last 6 months, we've had more than probably 149 meetings, all various sizes with various groups of people, but that's equated to probably over 300 hours. So there's a lot of information that's been gathered in terms of how that informs our design and where we move forward. If you break it down to just our design process, we've had 38 core team meetings. The core team is Scott and himself, with the project managers from the district, with the CMs, and with the design teams, with the lead. So that's that core group that's navigating. We meet weekly as we move through the process. The design team by ourselves, without Scott and the CMs, we've met over 46 times. So this is a lot of conversation, but we want to make sure everybody's connected, everybody's moving forward with the right direction. Programming meetings are with the district, whether it's with staff groups. We've also met with leadership administrative groups, principals. So that's who informs that programming piece. And then those user input sessions. Those have been everywhere, where we showed up at Sherman Middle School and listened to the students. We had an evening meeting with the community where the neighbors were all invited. So we want to make sure we hear from everybody's voice. These are just some examples of those input sessions. We do exercises. You'll see this image right here. So we call that a red green dot exercise, where we might put up images, both interior as well as exterior, and they can put comments on them. They can put dots on them, but it's another way we can gather their input. We learn just as much from what they don't like, from what they do like, but we want to make sure we hear from through everybody's lens. So even post-it note exercises, as well as just group conversation. In the community sessions, these were in the evenings, so we could accommodate schedules as much as possible. But the blue squares to the right, that's another tool we use. And so that was a tool where as they can use QR codes to provide input through their phones. But as they provided that input, you see that Wordle down there on the far right side. And that Wordle, the way that works is the larger the image, the bigger the text. That means that the more frequency that we've heard that input. So that's going to tell us that diversity, community, inclusiveness, safe, those were all the most common elements that it's part of that feedback with that community session. And then, like I said, we went to the phase 1 schools at this point. We'll go to the phase 2 schools when we get to that point in the schedule. But with the phase 1 schools, We showed up during the school day, you know, you'll see, it looks like we did the exact same exercise, which we do. But we're getting input through a different lens, and so that's the important part, is even though they do the same exercise. We understand it from a student perspective, we understand it from a staff perspective, and we understand it from a neighbor perspective if they came to the community session. So that's that big piece of data that we want to make sure we capture from everybody's viewpoint.
So as we look at, Susan described a lot of different data points, and there are, and a lot of information to sift through and digest and start to come up with what are our guiding principles in each of these kind of different categories. So when we think about overall, and Susan pointed out a couple of these words, but we think about school security, and that school security looks at a lot of different angles, starting maybe at the broader site and how our buses and cars and walkers and pedestrians interacting, and making sure our site is safe, making sure our access to building is safe, making sure that we have observation points within the school, so that we kind of keep an eye on what's happening while giving kids agency to do what they do best to learn. Making sure that we have building and lockdown points within the building in case there would be an episode where there'd be an intruder, understanding what those lockdowns might look like. Creating separate entries for combination schools so that those kids feel like their place of belonging has their own identity. Making sure that we're being aware of technology, how technology is used in education, and making sure that it's flexible and mobile. And making sure that the learning environment itself is flexible. It's adapting to what we're doing here, and it's adapting throughout the school day. Making sure we're having universal and inclusive design and the principles that go along with those concepts. Understanding that these are community spaces, and making sure the community feels welcome in them, and providing spaces where community can get together inside these, and ensuring that the spaces and the buildings are high performing and sustainable. So kind of overarching. And then as we get into each of the schools, when we think about elementary schools, making sure that those younger learners are having a place of belonging, a neighborhood, so they have cohorts within their building that they feel like, I know this is my place within this bigger building. Making sure there's opportunities for collaboration even at this young age, and what it might mean to get the younger learners, and ensuring that we have materials in those buildings that are resilient and easy to maintain. Understanding the interaction with technology and the interaction without technology. How are we learning without technology? Making sure that we have flexible furniture and technology that can adapt throughout the day. Small group learning opportunities. So understanding that we have spaces where they can learn independently in small groups throughout the day. And always looking at it as student-centered. So in the younger ones, making sure as you're evaluating, the furniture is right-sized. The windowsills are right-sized. The doors and entries, everything feels right-sized for that size learner. As we go into middle schools, it's some of the same messaging, but it's just upscaling it a little bit, getting that connectivity, again, collaborative and those cohorts within the larger school, but maybe more opportunity for collaboration and a little more independent learning and a little more cross-pollination of kids within neighborhoods. Again, the finishes, always looking at resilient and maintainable things, finishes, and then the flexibility, and even some more, maybe small group learning and independent learning. Early opportunities for project-based learning and authentic learning, and again, student-centered, what's appropriate for this age group in those learning environments. And as you get into the high school learners, again, creating a unique identity for kids that are coming to this building, having their own entrance, their own space to be who high school's learners are. Making sure that their spaces are flexible and they have lab spaces that can grow with them, and as programs change, they can flex to what they need. And even providing spaces where mentors, either community mentors or business mentors, can come in and work with students in a safe and secure environment. And again, student-centered. These are bigger and older kids, and more mature kids. As we look at specialized spaces, making sure we have a variety of lab spaces, we call them, and whether that's what you recall from the industrial tech, where we might have lathes and that kind of industrial equipment, to cleaner labs where they might flex. In one period they might be coding, but the next period they might be actually building hardware, maybe a computer based. Making sure that the fine arts are covered so that we have spaces that are appropriate for instrumental and vocal and general music. Making sure we have great spaces for visual and digital arts opportunities. And each of the middle schools right now is planned to have a performance space so that kids can show their work, whether it's performing arts or it's speech or it's drama or whatever that might be, but having that opportunity. And you can never get away from these areas without people saying a lot about storage. That's what they told us about. Make sure you have enough storage for all those fun things that we're gonna do. And as we get into athletics, we heard a lot early on that we really want to start to emphasize and give the kids that outlet for that opportunity to compete in athletics. So making sure the spaces are appropriate for physical education during the day, but also for those extracurricular activities. So wood competition courts with spectator seating, making sure that the kids have access to outdoor spaces that they can continue those activities outside. We did talk a lot about locker rooms and we kind of moved around the paper on this one. We started out locker rooms and then we were no locker rooms and then we ended on a space to change your clothes and some independent individual locker spaces that are smaller rooms for the need for privacy or whatever that might be, but offering that opportunity and again, storage.
So we're gonna talk a little bit about programming, and give you a little bit of a budget update, but when you think about programming, we start out, after we have all that data input, and we kind of analyze what we've heard. We start out by talking about needs wanted. So the blue sort of dot line at the top represents, we had a starting program. There was a program established for the Ref 24 vote last November. So that was a starting point. Then we meet with administrators, we meet with the your curriculum leaders, we meet with the principals, and so we hear about needs, wish, and wants. So at some point, the program grows, right? Because everybody's putting in all their requests. Like they think, I need this here, and I need this here, and I need this here. But through the process, so that's where the line goes up. Then we have a lot more conversation where we sort of talk about flexibility, adaptability. We look at spaces that can be dual purpose, that can support multiple functions. So and then we weave scheduling. And so then that's where the efficiencies start to come out, because we don't want 10 classrooms that are only utilized, 8 of them are only utilized for half of the day. So that's where we try to think about how do we design a space that maybe in the morning can be an avid classroom or in the afternoon can be a health classroom, and change as the teaching pedagogies change and the curriculums change. So how can that serve the district going forward? So that's why the numbers sort of tends to go up and then it tends to come back down. That's how we work through that process. And the images below are just examples where we're moving things around. We're trying to say, okay, what if this goes here? Okay, this group needs this. So how do we get these spaces in that part of the plan? And it's an evolution in terms of how we build a program into maybe what a floor plan might look like eventually. You want to speak about our budget process?
I'm sorry, board member.
You-
Vanderbilt, yeah, we're almost done.
Okay, didn't know if you wanted it
After this-
for budget.
Yeah, there's a few more slides and we can,
Okay, didn't understand the misread here.
I got you.
Yeah, I can start off. So with the RFPs that went out, the schedule for referendum 24 was phase 1, 2 new schools, phase 2, 2 new schools, phase 3, 1 new school, 2 renovations. And it has to be done that way. That's a lot of work to try and pretend we're gonna do it all at once. But the team and others were concerned, what happens if we start with phase 1 and there's no money left for phase 3? How do you address that? And so the solution we came up with is to figure out that programming exercise that you just heard all about and some cost estimating for all 5 of the new middle schools. That way we could set up budgets and allocate money for all 5 schools and make sure that, oh, we didn't go over in phase 1, phase 3 has to pay for it. All 5 of the new schools' budgets were set or are in the process of being set, and so we don't have any what ifs down the road. It's been a massive endeavor on the design team. There was drawing sets like you wouldn't typically see for 50% SD. There was drawings, there was notes, there was thoughts, there was anything they could think of to convey get a price for this and a price for this, and the CMs had to really develop very thorough cost estimates at a very breakneck pace with sets that this is very atypical, but this is the team working together to understand what we need to do to successfully deliver 7 projects, 5 new schools, and make sure that we're budgeting and planning for everything appropriately and not one at a time, and then get what's left. And so this was a very intentional endeavor, and so far it's been incredible to watch.
I'll add to that briefly. The Concord Group is responsible for holding us accountable for our budget. They're watching it on a daily basis. And also putting pressure on all of our teams to make sure we comply with those means, right? It's not satisfied until it's right. And I would tell you the CMs and everybody's done a great job looking forward as well as building that contingency for tariffs and what's happening geopolitically and where there's some cost advantages. You know, they build stuff every day, right? This is an alternative. Use this. The price is going to go up. We can secure this faster, much better, and give us the longevity that we still need. So a lot of this comes back with very intentional feedback of don't go down this hole because you're getting stuck later. Let's think about all of this at the beginning, make sure we're very intentional in our decisions, and we all can stand behind it and validate the cost, not today, but 4 years from now. Right? So that's the forward look, right? We've got to be intentional. Next, we got a couple more slides. We'll take a break.
So on a sustainability front, this is a very important topic, both for the design team as well as for the district. But we wanted to explain a little bit about OPN's practice. Where the AIA is a national organization, it's association or American Institute of Architects. They have established a framework for design excellence that weaves these 10 points of sustainability or performance into practice in the way we work. OPN aligns ourselves with these and takes this framework and applies it to our projects. So even though these may not all exactly apply the same way, but we are working to make sure our projects are equitable with the community. We're making sure that we're looking at energy efficiency. We're setting up these buildings for long term. I mean, schools are thought about as 50-year buildings. And so what can we do today to make sure in 50 years, it's still responsible to the environment, it's still responsible to the communities. So this just gives you an idea about the framework that the AIA and that how we work in terms of applying our projects to this framework. And so it's really thinking forward in terms of zero carbon, resilient, healthy, and equitable built environments. And so that's a responsibility that we put on ourselves. So at the beginning of this project, one of those data input sessions that I mentioned was we held a sustainability workshop. And so with our in-house performance director, we held a workshop with the district as well as the design team. And we focused on things like well-being, energy efficiency, resiliency, and things about how to support the community as well as be a school building. And so we worked through a bunch of exercises of brainstorming, how we could not just come up with ideas, but how we could implement ideas. What does that mean to the project? Which ones are hard? Some of you see the bar across the top about the red to the green. Some are easy to implement, right? No brainers. Some are really difficult and they require change. So that's where we sort of said, okay, how do we work through this? And so then the result of this workshop was establishing goals for these projects and with the district. And so thinking about district's initiative to be net zero by 2045. What does that mean for the schools we're doing new today? And how can we set them up to align with that? You can't get 40 years down the road and then change your school to all of a sudden meet those goals and targets. So trying to think about that proactively. I'm not going to go through the whole list, but you can see there's things on there about EV charging. We talk a lot about systems and envelope performance. That's how efficient the windows are, what the heating and cooling systems are doing in the building. So those are obviously have ties into operational costs, also student comfort, staff comfort. So weaving that all in, we want to make sure we're thinking about that. We also talk about universal design. Universal design doesn't stop with just ADA accessibility, right? There's a lot of universal design applications that have to do with the neurosciences and how do our spaces and how do our new buildings support all those needs regardless of the spectrum that it's on. We talk about LEED. LEED is a certification process, right? But it's also a certification process that shows your responsibility in terms of how we think about our systems, how we put the parts and pieces together to be efficient and also to be responsible. So this was a lot of work. This work is not done. We are in the schematic design phase, and so a lot of this is still to be implemented as we work through those details and actually get to the occupancy where we can sort of test the buildings and how they perform in real life. All right.
Thank you so much.
So we'll pause for this first set of questions before we get to the actual site.
Board member Vandermeul and then board member Muldrow.
Certainly, I appreciate the commitment to universal design because oftentimes people do think that ADA is where we stop. I think that things like accessible door buttons are non-negotiable, but that's amazing. My big ones that I worry about are door locks and security, and here's what. Right now, we have a system in which all the doors are locked for security. And that's wonderful case of shooting, except for if you're like me, autistic, run slow, guess what? As an individual with disabilities who you'll see me walking around during this meeting, we leave, we're sitting ducks, and we can't get back in the building and get back in the classroom. Can there be a place where we can go so that we're not the target? Because it's something that I do worry about. Gotten better at the running, but I'm not great. Let's put it mildly. Additionally, when we're creating, you'll hear a lot of quiet space in that. Wonderful. On our security or our rooms for behavior, please, 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 no locking doors. Otherwise, you turn it into a prison cell. And my big one is also on outlet. A lot of times, and this goes back to early days of computers, I never could find an outlet to plug in. I'd have to sit in the very back and not be able to see because I couldn't plug in my machine. Now we have even more machines. And this was in the late 90s. So just saying, this, I don't think we should reduce it. If anything, I think we should increase it. And the last one is, I'm thrilled it's student-centered. Also needs to be staff-centered, like some for teachers out planning rooms. And my one want would be to have independent living where individuals with special needs they need to can learn independent living skills, whether it be washroom, washer, dryer, those kind of things in that actual setting and not in segregated. That's all I have.
Do you want to respond? You want us to respond?
Yes, please.
Oh, yeah, please do.
Sorry, I
Yeah,
scared
Kevin,
people a little on that.
Like speaking our language. We are thrilled about K-12 design. We're passionate about it. And that's why I'm a practice leader. We invest in it. So we go all over the country, go to conferences. So let's talk about school safety first. We do take school safety very seriously. And so what we do is we believe in having learning on display. Kids are have better outcomes if they can see active learning happening and authentic learning happening. And so closing a locked door closed all the time where you can't see anything else going on isn't necessarily the best neurologically or for brain development or for learning, but you do need to have those barriers because intrusions do happen. And so what we say is we create enough barriers in your school. So you reduce the number of access points to any building. And after a school day starts, you reduce that down to your main entry. And you make sure you have secure vestibule. So right there, you put three barriers before you can even get to children. And then within the quarters, we have lockdown systems that we design so that if you had an emergency, you can lock down. So those are locked down. You also have corridor lockdown points that would close and lock and engage locks. And then you would have those neighborhoods I was talking about. that offer collaborative learning environments so that kids can go back and forth and work with easily and pull out areas for people that are maybe neurodiverse and have opportunities and need that smaller spaces for learning, offering that in an easy, accessible way, but providing the security of all those lockdown points. So you might have 5 or 6 lockdown points before you can ever get to the students. So that kind of helps. You don't have to run.
Yeah, thank you.
You're locked in.
No one wants to see this.
Right. We talked about, we always want learning spaces to be student centered, but that's not at the expense of having environments that are great for staff and faculty. And so we are designing in teacher spaces that are workshop spaces, or they can go and they can do their work, they can collaborate, they can go for later lunchtime or their planning periods. So kind of a teacher's lounge space where they have a lactation space available, have their restroom in that space. And then you talked also about, you asked about the life skills. I love that you asked that because we firmly believe that, and starting in even young grades to starting to teach kids that need that extra help with learning those life skills, but especially at middle schools, we are planning life skills situations and apartments kind of situations where kids can learn those life skills at school and take them into the community. We also are looking at community room spaces. And like Susan talked about, and Scott has pushed us and pushed us and pushed us about making sure that we're making the most out of our spaces that we're designing. So say it's a community room that might have a washer and dryer in it, because you might have communities that these schools are serving that maybe need to come in and use the shower, or maybe you use a washer and dryer, and maybe have a pantry, whether it's food or clothing or hygiene products. So those spaces would be designed in, but during the course of the school day, there might be another opportunity for a classroom to go in there. That's a smaller group meeting space. So I think we're addressing all those things. I'm excited to hear that you're asking about outlets. Yes. Well, there's code.
Everybody's asking for that one.
Yes, there are. And so we'll have plenty of outlets, and we understand. We wear computers now, right?
Yeah.
We do need to make sure that we understand the need for that. We understand the need for charging stations. These are one-to-one schools, so people bring a school issued device. We want to make sure that they're charged, if they're not getting charged at home. So there's an opportunity to charge it. And that can be through furniture, through outlets, charging stations. Yes.
And the only other thing is just, if you do any behavioral rooms.
So that's a code thing. So we always have, we never want to put a child in a place. Sometimes children, for their own safety and the safety of others, need to be in a contained space. But you always have to have observation, opportunity to see that child, and you also have to have positive engagement. So whether that is electronic, there are 2 different types of locks, typically a mechanical. So I have to physically engage that lock, but the minute I walk away, it's unlocked so that you never trap it. So yes, that's part of our standard of care.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And I thank my board for letting me go as in depth on these questions.
Yes.
And that's all, Chair.
Thank you. Board Member Muldrow. Toronto.
Thanks, Chair Castro. I really appreciate this presentation. I think it's a tremendously exciting moment for us as a community. And I think a lot of the thought that you all have done in terms of the long-term kind of implications of this body of work is really reassuring to me as a board member. I think folks are trying to be as thoughtful as possible. That being said, I have really specific questions about what our facilities will look like. And I heard you all speak both to kind of what early adolescents need developmentally, and also kind of just reference our middle school students as like bigger, more mature young people. I have concerns about the adultification of middle school students. And I also don't want to erase the reality of what it means to be a pubescent young person. And so I think of our bathrooms really as so much more important to our students who are just like getting their first period, right? And what that looks like in kind of later elementary school and middle school. Talk to me a little bit about how the space will be really specifically designed to kind of meet students at that point in life, both honoring that they are still our young people, they're still children, and the reality of what it means to be a pubescent young person is has implications in terms of hygiene and in terms of what our students need from us.
That's like a multi-tendril. There's a lot of things going on there, and you're right, middle schoolers, that's really awkward age. We can all remember being at that age. Feeling you're growing into yourself. And so restrooms, we wanna make sure we have availability of single-use restrooms for kids that just really need that. But we also know that middle school, intentional, unintentional, kids can be kind of hard on each other. And so we wanna try to take things, simple things like pulling wash basins out of where the stalls are. If you have multiple stall restrooms, pulling those out so kids are in there for their time. And then they come out to wash or to do like that, so they're not lingering in there. So it reduces your risk of bullying, which is a school safety issue. But it's also providing those single use restrooms for kids that just, I can't do this, or maybe I am getting my first period and I don't want to go into a stall and have someone hear a wrapper open or whatever that might be. So,
Just the idea of like walking out of a stall with blood on your
yep.
you know.
So having them and making it not be a big deal, so that these single-use restrooms are sprinkled in around it, it's not a big deal, that kids feel better about that. It's kind of like what we talked about with the single-use changing stations in the athletic areas.
Okay, one of the things we've seen at our or at our high schools after our renovation was vandalism specifically to those spaces, specifically to restrooms. Is there anything in our restrooms, if you go into the Madison School of Ecology, their restrooms are actually supporting kind of the educational environment. So you're studying bird calls, you can go into a bathroom and hear bird calls, playing. There's also chalkboards that encourage people to write like nice notes to each other or things that are particularly body positive. Are there proactive tools related to kind of keeping kids from being expressive in negative ways in those spaces when there is an adult supervision?
I love the bird call thing. I have, in all the conferences I go to on learning spaces, I have never heard that.
It's down the street, you can check it out.
I love it. I'm gonna have to read more about that. But no, we haven't talked about that. Often there's a place to display, whatever they call it, the flash or whatever, the newsletter. So you can insert a space. So we sometimes employ things like that where you can have, the principal can have, or the counseling office or whatever can have body positive or just even culturally positive messages for the school, or this is our theme this week is you're gonna say one good thing about somebody, and so it could be a place where you put pamphlets. We've done things like that, but we have not explored some of those things. I think they're worth talking about, learning about.
Yeah, I think kind of getting away from a problem that we already know we have and really doing the research to effectively encourage students to maintain the space and participate in the space in ways that make sense. I really love the single-use stalls, both for our students who need additional privacy and for our students who don't identify with the gender binary. So making sure our trans and non-binary young people feel included and seen within their space is so tremendously important. And I really commend you all on doing that. That is both practical and inclusive. My last question related to how we're supporting the arts and technology. And so I know not all of our middle schools, and Cindy, correct me if I'm wrong, not all of our middle schools have 3D printers, but a significant number do. I think all of them should, right? I think that's an area where we want to be equitable in terms of our distribution of resources related to technology. And also our relationship to the arts. So what kind of spaces are our students going to get in terms of dance, theater, music, and the more creative expression? They need a very life-changing outlet, especially at an age where maybe, not to generalize, the feelings can get big at middle school.
They are big, very big feelings. And some of the conversations we've had already, the challenges with budget, and that you saw that graph that showed us where we started with early on, this is what our goal was for footage. And it shows up when we talk about all the wants, and that could be, the wants could include a yoga studio and a dance studio and all these wonderful things.
A yoga studio and a dance studio be the same studio?
So that was where I was going. So as we start to say, we want this and this and this, we start to bring that down where we say, how can we use flexibility and design flexibility into some of the spaces? Are we going to be able to have a yoga studio and dance studio in these rooms, these buildings? Likely not, but we're going to have gym space that's going to be adequate enough that you could partition off them. You'll be able to have curtains that partition off, and maybe for a block of time, whether that's a quarter, a trimester, a semester, whatever that is, maybe it is mats in there, and maybe it is less lighting, and maybe it does kind of become a yoga studio part of that time. In our labs, we'll have opportunities that you can put 3D printers, because the labs have to be flexible. Right now, 3D printing is really important in that that's something that kids are learning, they learn to do. 10 years from now, that it might be look totally different. It might be much more, it's laser printing and it is different technology and it looks different. And that space needs to accommodate that. So making sure that you have the furnishings are flexible and can move. Picture a room that has, like, much like these tables are, and you're set up in a square right now, but maybe it becomes a robotics lab. And so this period, everything gets pushed aside because I need the whole space to put my ring up there and I'm going to demonstrate my robots and how they're working. So very flexible space that way. Cord reels, picture that from the top, and making sure we have those surrounded by outlets, but we also have power available that's not tied to the furniture or not tied to the wall. So I think that that's what creates spaces, having adequate labs that can flex through the years. Maybe agronomy becomes big and you need space for studying seeds and development. Maybe you can bring in grow lights too on a table that goes around the perimeter that has the infrastructure that can support that. So we're trying to think creatively and flexibly while addressing the programs that you're having today.
I really appreciate that. I think the emphasis on what is sustainable and renewable energy makes me really happy. I think hearing schools referred to as a 50-year building. I went to East High School and Emerson Elementary School. Those buildings have been around for a really long time. And I think when you have a project that is this large, our community will be paying for a very long time. You want to think that we're building structures that are sustainable and that are built to last with a high quality expectation. And what I'm hearing from you all is like floor to ceiling, these buildings are going to be a celebration of our students and our communities and learning. And that's pretty thrilling. So,
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'd like to add a comment to your restrooms. In our high school, we have just redone a lot of the restrooms. It's drywall, so we put a FRP panel. You all know we have
We know every.
used by dairy industry, so it's resilient. Makes it light and bright, right? So part of things that damage happens, it takes forever to repair. It takes time. This is kind of a surface. You can't really get to it. In addition, people like to add graphics upon graphics. It becomes a mural you don't want. So having the ability to clean it very quickly is what our high schools will have and starting to get in when they're almost done. And same thing on new schools, right? How do you prevent some of that, but also have the ability to add stuff you can add purposely, not to get at and prevent some of those future actions too.
I think that I am curious about how effective that is long term. Look forward to learning more.
Stop by Memorial West. Very bright.
Thank you. Board Member Saravo, then Board Member Mosner-Feltham, then Board Member Pearson.
Thank you, Board Member Castro. A lot of the stuff that's covered is, I just love where the conversation's going, but as one of the newer board members and having a big insight into physical access to the building, so a lot of my insights are kind of coming from there, things I've seen in new and older buildings that I've been kind of coming across. So there's like 3 different spaces on this town, so I'll kind of hit one at a time because they're not exactly connected. When it comes to accessible parking, I always find out that's usually in the teacher's lot. Not always very clear, just signage. I was talking about some of this before. But then there's also lack of access to the building, usually from that space for a community member who has to use those spaces. And I know that we were talking about single access points, but I still think like, how do you give someone building access when the parking is in a very specific area? And so I'm wondering if that is something that we are looking at.
You know, and we are specifically looking at that, and then some of the things you'll see, we'll point them out to you. Very definitely, it's top of our radar.
Okay.
We'll get your expectations.
Okay. The bathroom thing, I was wondering, are we thinking about like universal changing
We are
places?
thinking of areas within each school that has assisted bathroom. Yes, so that an adult or there are some children that need assists to come in and little space. Yes, we are doing that in design.
In a restroom rather than being in the nurses?
It will not be in the nurse's office.
And is this for high school or both middle and high school space?
All.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yep.
I like it that the Capitol has added a space to there and they have it like very explicit, so people actually know that it's a now and popping up in more places. And then the other thing I was thinking about is when we were talking about the arts. I I do adaptive dance, so I've also used a lot of those spaces and been able to find out from MSCR like which schools have what. And when you're talking about sharing spaces, I really hope that you're talking with the schools about what does that mean? Because I've seen dance floors without mirrors. Some gyms have they have a lot of texture on the floor, so it makes it really hard to move around. So sometimes the space I'd be sure might not be ideal to be the best crossover space, or if something, you don't want the mirrors visible all the time, well then just make sure you have a curtain or something like that. Like if we're doing like a shared space, like I'm just hoping that people really understand what does that mean, or what will be included in it with that space.
So right now at the middle school level, we are looking at hardwood gym floors for the gym spaces. You also have the instrumental, vocal, and general music rooms, and so sometimes vocal rooms, sometimes we'll design in, and that would come more in our design development, what Susan said comes next, whether there are, sometimes a vocal music will have a wall of mirrors because they might do show choir, or they might do things that are more involved dance, and so sometimes those spaces are cross-purposed, but we have not right now gotten to that depth of design, understand if we'll have to have mirrors for dance opportunities.
I'm bringing it up ahead of time.
Yeah.
That was meant.
That's awesome.
Perfect timing.
And I think the only other thing I was thinking of is, do you have an expectation for what a community space is, so that we know like where is an accessible button to be, like outside, like library and like gymnasium, things that are like.
We do want it adjacent or tangential, easily accessible to like an open space, like a common space and a gym space, but it's a space that can be within it, have a restroom and shower and pantry space, so small meeting space, as well as contiguous or adjacent to or nearby a larger gathering space like a conference.
She was asking where accessible doors, like.
Oh, yes.
rooms.
I see.
So yes, the rooms you described are correct. We need to go through those details, but Scott, so we've already talked about this at certain levels. We need to get that's in that next level of DD phase where we will identify the doors, but we have heard multiple times from the team from MMSD of yes, more than just the front doors. It's, you probably described it well, probably the library, probably the core gyms, right, where there's more community access. So
Yeah.
each building will be probably a little different, but we will need to work through those things.
Okay, those are just expectations, usually like pretty much we should have everybody have access to it. So.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
That's great detail.
Thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Mosner Feltham.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you so much for this presentation. It's really great to meet all of you. I have 3 questions. My first question is, like you said, it was pretty unconventional to have done the sort of like costing out of all at once. And I guess my question is like, how do you not run out of money on other projects if you don't do that?
So most projects aren't 7 schools.
I see, okay.
So that's
But
like, that's the
scope
big
of
one,
project.
right? That this is a serious program of projects.
Got it.
But so with that, even going in and saying, here's how big we think these schools are. And what the team has figured out in this first 50% SD is quite different from where we had kind of at a high level with some information started, great start, much more information now, and a lot of the buildings have size different. And if we had only done the first phase and just assumed the others were what they were, it might have tried to lower the budget to accommodate, bigger buildings, but say a big first phase building is bigger and they found out some of the later ones are lower, then we could go with that size and go with that budget. But yes, having 7 buildings to program and budget at once, pretty unique situation.
Got it.
Could
I appreciate that
add
answer.
a little more, maybe
Yeah.
just for clarity, because I think it's, the difference, we would typically give a napkin sketch, we would call it, which might be just a couple floor plans in the program that was developed that says this building's 100,000 square feet, and good luck for our contractor friends, and they gotta make up a lot of like unknowns. We chose to do quite a few more drawings as was earlier to explain, which is kind of the atypical part, but very, very effective, obviously, for all of us to learn a lot together.
Definitely. I find it really, really reassuring to hear. So I really appreciate all of your work on that. And I expect that community members listening and tuning into this also really appreciate that. So thank you. Now I have like two specific questions. One is like about the restrooms with no locker rooms. And I'm just like, I'm having a hard time imagining like a 40-person gym class, everybody changing in time to get to class with no locker rooms.
Mhm.
I don't know, right? I'm not a gym teacher. But that struck me as like a surprise. And so I would hope that whoever is telling you this is the right people to be telling you this. Because I'm not the right person, but I do know that surprised me. And then I have a question. I guess that wasn't a question, that was a statement. My question is about staff restrooms and how you're figuring out how many is enough for staff to be able to use the restrooms too, because I don't know. I don't like sharing restrooms with students.
Right, and there will be a staff restroom within the teacher lounge space within that door, so that's only accessible to staff. And there'll also be one somewhere up in student services welcome center area that would be only accessible to staff at
Okay.
a minimum. And then there's the single use restrooms.
All around, right? Okay. Can I ask a question about the staff lounge thing? Do you get the sense that like people use those?
We do, and it depends upon, again, scheduling. So sometimes it might become a touchdown space for teachers during planning period if their classroom needs to be used for something else. So it provides a lot of different things. It's a workroom. So it could be copier located. It could be where your vending or your refrigerators for your lunches are. It's often a place for your teacher assistants to be able to maybe clock in and check email and have a landing spot there too, as well as just kind of your getaway time and you have it's a little bit of a respite. Yeah, so we do find that they are used, and we did find when we engaged with the staff, it was a very high between that want and need.
Okay.
I think what we see anymore is we balance the scale of it versus these large rooms that sitting there, like probably what you're trying to process versus trying to work with you to scale how make sure it's very functional.
This has me asking one more question, which is about flexing classrooms. And like how you're making, right? So when I taught at West High School a bunch of years ago, we did not have enough classrooms for every single teacher to have a classroom. And so what that meant is you're switching classrooms 2 or sometimes 3 times a day, which means maybe I'm not going to do an anchor chart in all 3 classrooms. Or maybe I am going to do 3 different anchor charts in 3 different classrooms at like quite a bit of effort. And so I'm hearing a lot about flexible space and flexible workspace, and I'm wondering how you're balancing what I consider like an imperative to have a dedicated classroom space whenever possible with the need for flexing.
I think we're doing a little both, and we're working really closely with Scott on that, and Scott's working very close with the administrators on that in terms of you will likely have your core space, especially if you're a core 7th grade math teacher, that will be where you teach. It's just that during that off period, it might be a counseling group that might go in there with a group of students and use it for something that's not using maybe those surrounding walls or the teaching spaces for that. We're also building in some ability to expand and grow through some of our, what we were talking about. There will be areas that could eventually turn into a classroom if the need becomes that we have to have more.
Remember Scott talking about that a few minutes ago? Okay, well, I appreciate you answering my questions and your presentation a lot.
Do you touch we didn't really hit the locker room, bathrooms that
Locker rooms, I will tell you, most of the staff and our teachers now, children don't change.
Okay, got it.
Just flow right through and flow right out.
Cool.
Thank you. Board Member Pearson, then Board Member Nichols.
Thank you. I won't be coming off of camera, but hey y'all, thank you for the presentation. Good seeing y'all. My question is for our schools that are adjoining. Will we be having separate spaces for them? And I'm thinking of like a gym and some of those like other kind of flex spaces, or will the schools be sharing those type of spaces?
Board Member Pearson, you and a few others have really teed us up well for the second part of this presentation. We're going to take you through and give you the best drawings and depictions of what we have for you. And you'll certainly see that, and perhaps that'll be answered as part of the latter part of the presentation.
Okay, thank you. And then the other question I had was about, I know that we've had extensive conversations around CTE programming and trying to find ways to bring some of that into our middle schools and programming for our middle schools. And I heard a couple things around like, like the flex spaces, but also like, if there's robotics going on, like we can do robotics and things like that. But will there be like opportunities will there be opportunities in our some of our spaces for like that CTE kind of like focused curriculum?
Yeah, and Board Member Pearson, before I turn it over to Cindy Green, I'll just share with you an irony from your question. We have one school right now where we're converting a locker room into a CTE space because it's not used. So kind of to what we were talking about earlier in terms of how our spaces are used, that's exactly how one of our schools is proposing to repurpose some space. Scott, do you or others want to talk about, or Cindy, I'm sorry, you want to talk about the CTE design that you took the teams through?
Thank you, Dr. Gothard. I'm happy to jump in here. I think Vicky mentioned this a little earlier, but we will have both what we call clean labs, which will allow for things such as Board Member Muldrow brought up, the 3D printers, robotic spaces, more of the IT tech. We will have what we call dirty labs for tech ed type of programming. We are considering programming at all of the new builds that will directly align to the experience that students will have in our high schools as it relates to the CTE lab spaces that we have put in the high schools. In addition to that, we've tried to ensure that those spaces are flexible in the sense that we don't know what some of the desires, STEM, STEAM related coursework might look like in 10 years from now. And so we want to ensure that the spaces can meet the coursework for today, but also adapt for some of the exciting unknowns about the future as it relates to more of the CTE coursework. So in short, Board Member Pearson, all of them will have a minimum 2 labs for CTE moving forward, and then we'll have art spaces as well.
And thank you. I appreciate that answer. I'll just I'll have a question like probably later in the presentation just around just overall, like now that we've finished our high schools, what are some opportunities of learning, especially, and then we've had a new elementary school, and so it's like those spaces of like learning that we can do things differently. And then my comment is just when I think about like what the next like 10, 20 years, we're already projecting what those careers are going to look like for our young people in the future, and what careers will be. Just making sure like we're my hope is that we're taking that in consideration as we're kind of like designing a school. And then the other thing is just like opportunities. It'd be great to like learn more about like opportunities for us to incorporate some things that we might be seeing. Like I know I heard someone say about the conferences and kind of going like nationwide and looking at kind of like models and stuff. It'd be good to like hear more later at another point, just around like how we kind of are incorporating that. I think there was a comment that was made, just in passing, when speaking with someone of like, you don't necessarily know what the opportunities are really there if you don't go to schools in other places. And so, Wisconsin has a very finite way of like doing education. Madison has a very different way of doing education. But I think it's always great to kind of like learn what other folks are doing and incorporate those things too. So then our students also have those opportunities to learn in different type of spaces that they may not have opportunities elsewhere. So that's it for me. Thank you, Simeon.
I do want to add a comment to work. Our CMs also want to get engaged with our youth in teaching the skills of the trades that they do during the builds, after the builds, trying to help build the community of what we do and how we do it, but also give students the opportunity to be hands-on and see things from different perspectives and really be a part of that process, not only for this school, but other schools, right? And this could be that future workforce that really get the experience that most kids don't have. So with them being in Madison, it's the next generation of workers, and they really want to show that, highlight, this is their space, right? Make a difference.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Board Member Nichols, then me.
Thank you, Chair. I have a couple of questions. Thank you for your presentation. I really appreciate hearing the level of detail that you've been undertaking to really get this big project right. I am going back to a couple of things that we said to the public when we put referendum 2024 out there. So the first thing is when we came up with the $507 million, we had some estimates for each school. And the total of each of those projects is what got us to the 507 million. So when you're saying tonight that you're budgeting the entire project in ways that you haven't done before, or it's not by phase of the project or by school, can you reconcile for me how we already said that we had kind of done some of this work on the front end? We came up with 507 million, and then what you're doing now to ensure that we can not exceed $507 million for the taxpayer.
Yeah, you can go if you want. Sure. All right, so yes, and there was pre-referendum budgeting. Aaron and Dave at Findorf were fantastic partners in setting those numbers up.
Yep.
When architects design a school and contractors price it out, they know roughly how much it costs to build their last building, the last 10 buildings, kind of the next building. They know right around where they're at, cost per square foot. They also understand, boy, if we do these level of things that might be a little more in finish, that might be here per square foot. They also know they could save money by doing this. When I say they change, it's a matter of flexing in programming size. We're still talking very similar dollars per square foot. We're still talking very similar on a percentage wise size of the building. But what we do kind of upfront is when you're programming and setting up a project, you would say probably 20% of the budget should be for soft costs. And by soft costs, that's the design firm, that's the IT, that's the furniture, that is everything else that's not the hard cost construction guys. The construction budget is definitely the largest, but there's another 20+% dollars that get spent directly by the school to other vendors, and really understanding what those needs are, how big each budget should be, what school's budget for each soft cost is really what allows us to have that confidence in the construction numbers moving forward. And normally we would set up a project, we put together a project feasibility budget right up front. Our document is 70, 80 lines that we're gonna put in numbers to, most of them right away or quickly. With these projects, because there's such an enormity, there's such a long-term scope, they had mentioned bringing on other team members. We are going through and putting out RFPs for our abatement contractors and all of our other team members to make sure that when we say, here's our soft costs, it's 24% or 22% or 20%. Because that small percentage of variation, when we're correct, might go to back to the school. It might fund one more size classroom. That might be kind of the difference between a high level square footage that we're running with for 6 months versus how much can we get right now. And it's not that we don't do it, it's the level of detail and the effort and the speed in which the teams are doing things that are atypical. To make sure that we are, with a very sharp point, getting the right numbers. And we're providing as much into the schools and the building as we can.
Kevin, I think one more way to say that is that, you know, we had to put together some pre-referendum costs because we had to print a number to take to our community.
Right.
So that exercise was individually to have those add up to the eventual 507.
Yep.
Now that we're actually putting, you know, those costs to projects, there is a lot of fluctuation as he just walked you through all of that. Our goal is still 507, but it's also to make sure we're satisfying the needs of each of the school sites as well. So it's just weighing that balance to get to our at or under 507 at the end of these projects.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you. Thank you both for that. I that was what I was taking from your presentation, but I was also looking back at my notes and just saying like, oh, I remember we had some figures for each of the schools. Related to that, at one point in the referendum conversation, we had used a metric of not, the choice to build new was based on the cost not exceeding 60%. Is that right, Scott, right, to replace? Do we use that? I know the decision has pretty much been made already, but as we're monitoring now kind of the details at a granular level, would we ever determine that maybe we were nearing that threshold or not nearing that threshold and want to make a different decision? Or is that ship kind of already sailed?
Yeah, so we are constantly monitoring. Our goal is to get the new buildings. That's our goal, right? But we also have to be conscious of our taxpayer dollars and ensure we still meet the process of the project, right? We're still doing ongoing maintenance of the last schools to work. But if we get the opportunity and we're using leveraging of by this amount of brick or this amount of materials, we can have enough cost savings by mass and by volume, and right design. And we need to make the decision for the last school build. We need to look at that evaluation. Similar to renovating it now is going to cost us this, and what's that delta, and have we saved enough money and done the right fiscal responsibilities to give us that opportunity? That's a conversation we have to have a year from now.
Got it. Okay. And then my last question, Chair Castro, is, and I hope this doesn't sound funny, for lack of a better word, but a lot of our facility planning has also been based on kind of the current state of our facilities, which we've used the letter grading, which has a lot of components that make up the grade of the facility. Should I assume that any school that is built brand new automatically is graded an A? And for any school that goes through renovations, which I know is not a complete rebuild, but it's a renovation, what could we expect about the grade for a building that gets renovated in this project?
Yeah, that's a great question. So new buildings should and will have an A.
Should get an A.
Should and will,
Okay,
right? It will is the key. When you do a renovation, you never get new.
yeah,
Still, you get like new. And it may be a B plus, it could maybe hit the A minus mark. But you still have things that ultimately will have to shift, have to give up something to get something in the end. So that's that latter line of like, there's decisions you can make to get me an A, I have to spend $4 more million, or am I okay with B plus?
okay,
Knowing I have a long-term maintenance and strategy plan to mitigate other risks.
yeah,
So those are things that we're battling, and we're doing the asset management, right? So we've got 2 schools done. We've got two new interns started today that are going through our schools and building that database and the life expectancy to start to pull that report card for that 2-year strategic plan is to say, what is my status of all of our schools?
Yeah.
And we use that to make the decisions going forward, part of this ongoing, what's the district look like, not today, but 10 years from now, and the long-term cost to replace.
great.
So those are the constant tools that we'll use, and we grade that upon. But answer your question, A, yes.
Okay,
New it's that question of is it B plus? A, it's that there's a very fine line how you determine those. what it is like. You never get new.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I know that in one of our previous conversations, we had talked about some of the factors that come with a project like this that are out of our control, right? Like maybe tariffs, maybe, the purchase of materials and supplies, just a variety of things that really we cannot control, but trying to use the best knowledge to look for cost savings and to stay on budget. I'm wondering, how much contingency do we build into a project like this that allows us the ability to, I guess, address market conditions?
Usually somewhere around 9 to 10%. So the CMs will carry a contingency within their construction.
Okay,
And I just want to be clear, we're assuming this discussion is beginning of construction. There's design contingency, but that doesn't count. That's a separate number.
okay,
Construction contingency is the contingency that the contractors carry within their budget. If this were a outside finance entity wanting to see it, they would count their dollars. Our budgets carry contingency for design changes, architectural change orders, or bringing in design consultants. Maybe we get to a gym and we think we should have an acoustic consultant or furniture design, or all sorts of other potential design options. We have then a contingency under that. And then at the very bottom of our budget sheet, we also track a overall project contingency. And if you add up all those little buckets of contingency, should be about 9%.
okay,
And then the answer to your next question, spending that contingency is one, when the need arises. And two, if we're doing well, say we get out of the ground, there's no surprises, we can start to set milestones to where we would appropriately reduce contingency. And to align that spending, say tariffs don't happen, but we carried some towards it. The design team is gonna have design alternates, things that we could do better that are sprinkled out down the time frame. So you don't make all the design decisions at the time of bidding. You would say, also, we would like to know how much to have more, cloud ceilings. And so that's a decision that doesn't need to be made till a year plus into construction. And if you got out of the ground, great, you have contingency. You can go spend it on this, or you can earmark future projects. But that way you're planning for contingencies to not come at the cost of square footage right away. You don't cut the size of your building to make sure you can absolutely fit. You plan, it's a whole planned process. So the contingency, the spend, the scheduling, where you want that to track and what you appropriately spend it on is part of one whole big process. It's not, we put aside, 3% for tariffs, and then when the project's done, you have this money, because it's really hard. It's easy to spend money at the end. It's very hard to buy good stuff, right? And so the constant plan is, how do I get the best stuff for this money? And it's something that we talk to regularly. AEs are well versed in this. The contractors know how to bid out these alternates. This team of experts is ready to handle tariffs and surprises and force majeure and anything else that's gonna happen.
great, thank you. I guess for Bob or Scott, I know because this project is 5 years and it's 507 million. The average person could just take 500 million divided by 5 and say, oh, you guys are spending like 100 million a year. But I know that isn't exactly the way it works, because it's very much built on the design of those schools that are in each phase. Does the board, will we get some kind of a report or a check-in later that's like, here's kind of the projected budget spend for each phase, once the budget is more kind kind of finalized with the specific details or?
I mean, it's close now.
No.
There's, I mean, this 507 million, there's only so many ways it can go.
Okay.
And so Bob and Scott and I have gone through and put together projected cash flows. You know,
Oh, yeah,
what are
that's
the
what it-
design costs, what are the
Thank you.
construction costs, when does that happen? You know, what does the bell curve of construction look like? And it'll become more refined and tighter, you know, as we start to, you know, get more bids and numbers from our contractors. But, you know, they've already shared, this is kind of how, you know, a general bell curve on construction might look. Design fees are fairly straightforward and laid out. It's the fee and then the size of each phase is a percentage by size. So we can get very close quickly. And then it's a matter of tailoring procurement and purchasing, design spending, change orders, you know, kind of when that happens to really match what we're trying to do or you're trying to do with bonds and finance. So we meet with the finance team pretty regularly, at least once a
Okay.
month, and
Okay, Kevin, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to exclude you in that. But the only reason I brought up that last point is one of the things I experienced since coming on the board, even when we had our last referendum, is that you'll still see expenses coming in. It looks like we aren't quite all the way, there was like a projected maybe cash flow spend, we're not quite there. The team knows the progress on the project, but I think as a board member, because we're not as close to the construction and all that. Sometimes I just remember feeling like, oh, like we're still spending money on that, or, oh, it looks like we're under. And then I would ask Bob sometimes, like, are we coming in under on that project? And it's like, no, there's still work happening. It just hasn't come in yet on the budget line. So it was more just I was just asking more around how board members can kind of generally see the projected cash flow on the project.
Yeah, once we start getting into the finite, start building and the costs start to roll up, right now it's
Yeah,
start putting actual cost to the build. We'll have a monthly report that comes out, you know, percent of completion to build to percent of funds expected.
okay,
You'll be able to see that analogy of like, yep, I'm at 99% of the billing and I'm at, you know, 75% of the spend. I know I'm doing okay.
okay,
So we'll be able to see those two markers to understand where we are in completion versus spend and expected, right?
great, thank you. All right, thank you, Chair.
All right, thank you. My two questions are, how are we planning to manage waste in a sustainable and respectful manner to the environment? And then my second question is, how renovation friendly will these new buildings be? Let's say in 10, 15 years from now, there's new technology with respect to sustainability. How easy will it be to renovate these buildings to incorporate that new technology theoretically?
I'll speak to the first part. So we've had conversations about respectful exits. We'll talk a little bit about that as at the end of this, but it's also having these guys' ability to how can we regrind material? How can we use it as base material for the next set of buildings, right? And transporting and doing those things so we don't throw bricks in a landfill, right? It's how we're using that material and using it granularly. And when we talk about when we're building in our village, we've had these conversations about if you have to add on a classroom for a locker room, how do we already have it sitting here ready to go, right? Open a few ceiling tiles, the girders are already set to build on. And then also building for expansion of utilities. What is the next step? What does that look like, right? Let's not deadhead ourselves. And then in some of these spaces, we can add technically some square footage, but some of the plots we can't. So it's like you're just kind of trapped in where we are as this build site. When we have those abilities and adding on like Black Buck offers, we put locker space in, come south a little. So there's things that we can work on when we're doing the build design phase is we've got a termination point here so we can use it later. So we're thinking that concept already building it in as we're building the school. It's a lot cheaper than.
Got it. Thank you. All right, board member Vandermeer, and then let's get back on.
Right. I just have one last thing that I forgot to say. Thank you for putting universal design first, of course, but also thank you on one suggestion on music rooms, right? The hardest thing was seeing some of our buildings where they had to move the music room because there was no elevator access to it. And trying to explain to a 10-year-old why they can't take band or have to move it is something that is not necessarily the best way of doing things. So that's my only other suggestion, and that's all I have, Chair.
All right, thank you.
So we will jump to part two. We'll go right through both of these, so you'll get to see the firsthand views of our new spaces. We'll do a little bit about the design where we are currently, what it is, what it's going to, a little bit of internal look, and then we'll fly through video for each school. So we'll go ahead and go through Sherman and Shabazz for.
Yep, so this is the fun part. So we're only gonna show you, obviously, the phase one schools, because that's now where we're focusing our time. So, let's get right to it. So, starting with Sherman Shabazz, this is the site location of Sherman Shabazz. You can see that red dashed line. That's the school, the district's property boundary. The orange lines you see on this slide represent topography. So when you see a denser area of orange lines, that's a slope. When you see them more spread apart, that's more flat. So as we start our efforts, as we look to these schools, we also do a lot of analysis. And so this is one of the things where we do a lot of site analysis. We want to think about the neighbors. We want to think about what's happening on Sherman Avenue versus Ruskin, and think about, you know, sort of how the lay of the land is. So as we do that analysis, one thing that's with Shabazz High School, the majority of the students at Shabazz come via public transit. So we also want to understand how the students get into the building, how they get to the site. Are they part of the school bus, the yellow school bus? Or are they part of parent drop-off pickup? And so how do those circulations work? We also want to think about the traffic of the adjacent streets in terms of how that affects safety and circulation as we think about our school. With Sherman Shabazz specifically, obviously the site's fairly limited. It's one of the smaller sites. We're building new building on the same site. So you can see with the existing building where it's located, naturally the new building needs to go to the south because that's where the open space is. So we're also thinking about the logistics of how do we build the new building while we keep the existing building operational until we're ready to move. So as we try to digest that, and I apologize, this rotated the site. So, so you could see it at a larger scale. But the existing building is right there on that part of the site. You can kind of see the roof through the diagram. But as we think about all that analysis, and we've heard very strongly from Shabazz students that their own identity, they want, even though they're one building, they're really two separate schools. And thinking about what does that mean for them? How do they enter Sherman and Shabazz, just like the other combo schools? They don't want to all come through the same door. It's a lot of traffic, it's a lot of congestion, and so that can cause problems. So we thought about how you put some of those shared amenities, which could be gyms, some of those large common areas in the center, but then creating two sort of education wings, which is sort of the light blue that you see on this diagram. And so how do you kind of create those zones of shared, but also have separation in terms of how you think about the school? And also, like I said, that public transportation is on Sherman Avenue, which needs to be as associated with Shabazz High School because a lot of the students utilize that as they get to school. So these are all the things we're starting to process as we start to formulate a big idea in terms of how we think about the site and where we go next with our. So this is the site plan today. So, as you can see, the existing building is towards the top. Right now, today, the proposed building is in this blue area, but we've thought about separate circulation. You asked about ADA parking stalls in terms of their relationship to the entrances. So at this point, Shabazz High School's entrance is in this corner. So separating that from the flow of the yellow school buses and the parent drop off, which is right now being planned off Ruskin for Sherman Middle School. So kind of using that building to kind of separate those circulation patterns, so we don't have a lot of crossings. Also thinking about how those school buses can line up along the curb, so those students can safely get off and enter the building. Not crossing that car traffic line, as you would say, with the parent drop off pickup. And so we try to keep everybody in their separate circulation patterns without a lot of crossover. But there are those busy times of the day. We also have been meeting with the city of Madison. And so getting their input and fire, making sure we got fire department access and proper area. Also making sure we're working with transportation, think about the flow, if we need to curb cuts, and so, and then thinking about how that circulation works. Any questions about the site plan? So, all right, so now let's look at the inside of the building. So this is, these schools are 2-story. So you're gonna see here on the left, this is the lower level, which is the street level. And then on the right is the upper level, so that's the 2nd story. When you see areas of concentration of blue, and the different shades of blue represent different types of education spaces, but the blue is those education spaces, whether it's those CTE classrooms, whether it's general classrooms, whether it's those lab spaces, even music spaces. The yellow in the center, as you can see, those are the gyms. Currently, this is Sherman Shabazz. There are 2 gyms planned. So there's a larger one with the section of bleachers on the left-hand side, and then the smaller one on the right-hand side. So even though the 2 gyms can support the whole building, the smaller one on the right is technically Shabazz's gym, and the larger one on the left is Sherman Middle School's gym. As you think about the main entrance, you can see Sherman Middle School's entrance is there on the left, and Shabazz's high school entrance comes off Sherman Avenue, and it's there at the bottom. So separating those entrances, pulling those circulation paths apart, also works towards safety and thinking about how the students come in and out of the building. You're gonna see some labels on each of the plans that say MS House. So when we have buildings that have a high count of students, so Sherman Middle School, 300 and some students, we think about how do we break that down, right? These are big buildings. And so how do we sort of set up schools within schools? So as we think about those houses are made up of a certain number of classrooms. They're made up of all those support spaces. I know you can't see the detail on this plan right now, but within that house, that dashed outline, you've got locker space, you've got restrooms, you've got classrooms, and you also have collaboration zones. So the students have pretty much what they need in those houses. So the middle schools, as we look at these plan layouts, the middle schools are divided by age group. So there's a house for 7th grade, there's a house for 6th grade, and there's a house for 8th grade. It doesn't matter in the building in terms of which house is which grade, but it allows them to put the 7th graders all together. It allows them to put the 8th graders all together without having long, what I would say, the old-fashioned corridors with lockers lining both ways, and you've got all the age group of students crossing paths. Those become problem areas. So now we associate these houses, and so once you're in your house, you have everything you need. So it's easier also for staff supervision in terms of being able, if a student needs to go to their locker and come back to the classroom, they don't necessarily leave that area of supervision, so they can keep an eye on them and where they go. You'll see green and orange areas in different parts of the building. That's administrative spaces. That's those student support spaces. So they're mostly associated near those entrances. And so that's where the principals are at, and that's where sort of getting those key people in those key areas to be able to function with the entrances of the buildings. You'll also see upstairs, we also have some orange and green spaces. So there is some administrators in the building who are more distributed. And so they're closer to the students, not necessarily closer to the front door. So we sort of position them around and at different levels of the building. So that sort of leadership presence and supervision are present in the student. On first floor, the red squares are sort of placeholders for those commons areas. That's where your cafeteria is. That's also their position near the gyms. So the school can be secured separately if there's an evening activity or a weekend activity. So we set up doors in the corridors to be able to lock down. So if the public comes in for an evening activity, they can't go throughout the whole building. They stay in those front areas where the commons is. They can have access to the gym. They'll have restroom access, but they don't need to go to all the classrooms. So we set up those points of security also to be able to have the building function, not just during the school day, but also after. As you go upstairs, you'll see two more middle school houses. So like I
see
said,
you.
there's three set up because of the three grade groups. But then to the bottom of the plan, it doesn't have a middle school house around it, but that sort of wing is all Shabazz High School. And so they're sort of got their zone of the building up on second floor. There'll be doors that separate the middle school students from the high school students, but they're sort of one big house in terms of how their spaces work. They have their sets of bathrooms, they'll have their library spaces, they have their art rooms. So they don't necessarily have to cross paths throughout the day to be able to go over to the middle school area or the middle school students vice versa to come over to Shabazz High School. So that was one thing we heard from both groups is they understand they're in one building, but they really want to function like they're two separate schools. And so thinking about how to position them in the building to be able to be successful. So we have a video to show you the exterior. So this is that north entrance side. As we zoom in a little closer, this will be the Sherman Middle School entrance. So the buses right there are on Ruskin. And you can see the parking lot and sort of the entry as you come into the building. Each entrance has its own little identity. Sherman's, so the large canopy to be able to protect the students enter the building, but also opportunities for murals. As you come around, this is the Ruskin side. And so that's those classroom wings. And so you start to see the materials and mostly the buff colors like a brick and combinations with metal panels and windows. As we come around the south side, this is where those music spaces are. They want to be a little taller, but they're not full 2-story spaces. So as that sort of connection of those music spaces, the large gray box in the center, that's the museums. They're the tallest, and the pool sort of wraps around them. And now as you come around this, it would be the west side on Sherman Avenue. This is the different identity that's for Shabazz High School. So a little different use of materials, giving them their own sort of identity and association with Sherman Avenue. So if you're coming up to this side of the building, you can tell that you're, without reading the sign, that you know that this is Sherman High or Shabazz High. The white shed is existing. And then as we come around on the north side, we're back to that entrance, and then you see where Sherman Middle School. So the center area where the two kind of come together, that's where those libraries are up on second floor. On that first floor is that large commons area that supports outside activities as well as the cafeteria during the school day.
All right, is this a good pause point for questions, or is there further, I think, on the slide deck?
This is it for Sherman Shabazz. The next one will be Blackhawk Golfers.
Okay, Board Member Vandermeulen?
Yes, just curious, I know you said the public can only go into certain spaces. I'm fine with that to a point with one exception. Parent-teacher night, where parents need to go to their kids' room and their kids' classroom, are they going to be accessible enough that the public can get in as much as the students can?
Yeah, and the function of how the building's secured is all done with the hardware. So on parent-teacher night, it can be opened up, so the public parents can get to the spaces they need to. But if it's on a Saturday night and there's a, MSCR basketball game or something else that really isn't a function of school, then those security points can be in place. So it can flex to support both.
The other question, and this is for my board member consideration, is this: I'm thrilled that these are 2 stories. I'm thrilled that they're elevators. Can we please change the concept that only those with a certified disability use the elevator? Because it forces individuals with disabilities who may not be out yet to state that they need to, which can lead to bullying and harassment. Is there a way we can make sure that if you need to use the elevator, you use the elevator? And that's all I have.
Thank you.
I really appreciate the focus on safety, but I am a little concerned that part of our emphasis is really about intruding into the building. And we've had 2 recent incidents in this community, and both of those were caused by students who went to the school. And so if we're creating a lot of barriers for the public to access these buildings, including parents accessing these buildings, how does our safety approach factor in when the student with a weapon goes to the school? And we know that that's more likely among our high school students. The fact that Sherman, Shabazz share a space, I think creates a different kind of risk in relationship to that. And I am curious about how we're managing that, because in part that has been why I've wanted us to explore whether or not having a middle school and a high school in the same building is best practice, is something we're really committed to as a district.
You want to answer? Yeah, you're absolutely right. Most issues come from within. And so it's, a lot of it is creating environments, because it truly is creating environments that kids feel safer and part of a community. As far as the high school, middle school, we create lockdown points, so high school students can't get in. You still have to create egress paths, but you create systems where you keep them separate, basically. So we are looking at how we'll control that with control points. And as far as the lockdowns, you always have the ability to egress. So if something happens within your neighborhood, those barriers are stopping from people to get into your neighborhoods. They're not stopping you from getting out of them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the other thing I want to say is that students are well oriented to what our process is in terms of lockdowns.
Yes.
So when you saw one of the incidences, so we have 2 incidents that happened in our community. One happened at a middle school and one happened at a K-12 private school. Neither of these are MMSD schools. I think it's important to name that. But the student who engaged at the middle school level intentionally engaged in that way during lunch as a way to get around some of that process. And so my hope is, moving forward in this conversation, we're just having a more realistic conversation about what these threats look like, and that we can de-emphasize some of the conversation about the intruder, because I think that's a false sense of security, that if we make it hard to get in from the outside, we're addressing that level of threat. And I believe that that is part of it, but I think we need to have a more data-driven approach.
Yeah, I think there is more holistic approaches to that, and I think it's creating the environment, understanding the psychology, and doing things that build kids up. And so even though we do these control points, we don't advertise that. It's for if this happens, but it's not like that's the focus. It's just, it's there. Just like your sprinkler system doesn't go off unless there's a fire. So we don't tell everybody, hey, look at theirs, we have sprinklers, but it's there in case of an emergency. Yeah.
So a lot of times these points of security, or these layers, it's managed by hardware too. It doesn't mean they're all shut all the time. And that sort of programming can be built in. So whether it's the principals or whether it's the administrative group between the high school and the middle school, they have some flexibility in terms of how that's managed. So it doesn't feel like we have all these lockdown points and that we can't get in or out of our building. We want the building to feel very welcoming and very safe, even though, like Vicky said, these things are built in, even though you may not physically realize it and see them all the time. But we have to think about ways that give them opportunity in those cases of a situation, they feel safe and can either exit or hunker down, whatever the appropriate response is at that time.
I greatly appreciate that, and I'll just say politically, I really appreciate the measures we're taking, and also I think we're a tragedy to happen in any of our schools. You know, I don't think it would be a matter of whether or not people were appropriately navigating the intercom or locking things. I think we have a gun control issue in the United States, and I don't need anybody to agree with me. I just want to say that I think it's almost a shame of how much we invest in these kinds of conversations and how many resources go into this. And I think we as a society could do a much better job of taking care of our young people. And I appreciate the work you all are doing to you know, rise to the occasion of this moment.
Thank you, board members, Saravo.
You, Board Member Castro. I just wanted, I'm very much just to emphasize actually both what Board Member Van Meulen and Board Member Muldrow just said, 'cause I was just over there last week and the navigation in those buildings was really interesting. It's to go from place to place for the event that they were having, which was open to families and different parents, stuff like that. To get from floor to floor, I had to use like 2 different elevators, and I didn't even know that you couldn't even tell when you entered into Sherman space. And then used the elevator from the 1900s and passed over to get around to the other space. But I'm just curious as to what does that look like? And I know you said elevators, and so now I'm wondering, are they gonna have their own? And then like, what does that look like?
Yeah, so right now we're planning 1 elevator per building, but we're locating it in a strategic spot. So
When you say per building, do you mean?
not Sherman has a separate elevator from Shabazz. So that would mean 2 elevators in the building, right? So even though Sherman Middle School is there and Shabazz High School, it's still 1 building. It just really has 2 program elements in school. So right now, we're planning 1 elevator per building, but we are also looking at where to locate it. In terms of it's accessible from both, right? And where does that meet? And we're working with the principals. We're working with the district and Scott to figure out what is that right answer. Elevators are not cheap. So what we're trying not to do is put, everybody has their own elevator and if it's not necessary. In terms of thinking about how people can use it and access it. But we are also thinking about sort of where stairs are located. In addition to being able to, the vertical circulation, just as important as we are where you travel across. As we get further into design, we'll start to look at wayfinding. We talked about navigating that building. I got lost the first time I tried to walk through that building. It is really hard to know where one is and where one isn't, and how do you get between them. So we'll be working closely with the groups when we get to that level of detail, which is in that design development stage about wayfinding, signage, access to those shared elements, where they're at and what makes sense. So there's a lot more to come on that, but right now we are planning 1 elevator in the building. And so thinking about how it can be located, serve both sides.
Okay. Thank you.
Actually, I share, I think this needs to be a point of order. I don't believe accessibility is something that focuses on what is cheap. I focus on what is necessary for the individual. That's something that absolutely anyone needs to use it.
Thank you. Any further questions? All right, thank you. Hey, go on.
Black Gompers.
All right. So similar graphics, but obviously a different site. So we're looking at the Black Rock Gomper site. And so this is same site plan where where I explain when orange areas are more dense. Those are topography versus spread apart, that's a flatter area. But unlike Sherman and Shabazz, Black Rock Gompers has a pretty large site. And so there's different ways to think about that circulation in terms of how you access and get in and out of the building. To the top of the screen is Wheeler, which is a pretty high traffic connector in terms of the street. But to the south, where the building access is today is Wyoming Way, which is a pretty limited residential street. So thinking about how those influences happen and how the building is positioned, once again, we have to build on the same site where the existing building is today. So we clearly need to look to the north part of the site for the new building because the existing building needs to stay operational. So this is that traffic flow, and pointing out Wheeler to the north as well as that Wyoming Way to the south. And currently, if you go to the school during those busy times of the day, it is highly congested. So we've spent a lot of time talking about the circulation on this site. It has a lot of topography, but also how we can take advantage of that and how we can think about the flows of the students for both Gompers Elementary and Black. So as we formulate sort of our big idea, this is where we tried to take advantage of using that topography and how we nest the building into the ground. And so there is also, if you're on the high side of this property looking south, it has quite a vista. So we're trying to think about how we relate to elementary students and middle school students, but also how we can have connections in the building, those shared spaces in the center, which is the gyms, but also those separated education areas. This is that vista. So as you think about when you're on the topography of the site, which is this diagram on the bottom, if you're on the north side of the site, it could appear as a single-story building. If you're on the south side of the site, it would appear as a two-story building, sort of like your walkout basement on a house. And so thinking about how we can take advantage of that in terms of how we position the building on the site. But ultimately, once the existing building has been demolished, the view to the south with the tree growth and the water tower in the distance is pretty stunning. So if students are in a classroom and can engage with that, that's also one of the benefits that this site lends. So as we look at the current site plan, once again, the proposed building footprint is in the blue. What we have in terms of site circulation and not depending on everything coming in Comanche Way and Wyoming Way, but thinking about that single story to the north in terms of the higher side of the building and putting Gompers entrance, the elementary school entrance off Wheeler Road. And so that separates that traffic pattern from the south side, which would be Blackhawk Middle School's circulation. You'll see sort of two loops on that south side. One is designated for the buses, the yellow buses, and that would be separate from the car traffic. So trying not to get those two patterns crossing each other from a safety standpoint. You'll see there's parking on both the upper level for the Gompers Elementary and some parking on the lower level where the Blackhawk entry is at. And then utilizing the rest of the site for more green space in terms of having those outdoor play areas for the students as well. As we look at the floor plan, this one's a little more complex. It's still 2 stories, but you'll see that the lower level, which is where the Blackhawk Middle School entrance primary is, that's really where middle school education happens. And so you'll see there's a house to either side of that entrance. The administrative office group and that community space are right there near that entrance. The gyms are positioned in the middle. We have music room just to the top of the gym. And then that commons cafeteria is just below the gyms. So this entire level, this lower level, is Blackhawk Middle School. As we look at going upstairs, you'll see the Gompers Elementary School entrance there on the right. And so this longer education wing that's at the bottom of the plan, that's Gompers Elementary. So Gompers Elementary is all on one level. And so they have all their classrooms. You'll see the blue or the green and the orange, which is their administrative groups and student services. And they have a separate commons area for their dining. But Gompers Elementary School is contained to all that part of the building. Then as you go past the libraries and to the top of the plan, you'll see one more middle school house, and that's stacked on top of this other middle school house. And then there's art room and some support spaces around it. So really, this building has the elementary school all on one level, and then the middle school is to the south. And parts of it are 2-story and parts of it are 1-story. We still are putting the elevator, the nurses suite, in those sort of central common areas, because those are the two things that are shared. So trying to keep them in a best location, and working with the district as to what that is. But between the two gyms, you'll see that blue square right between them. So that's that performance space. So it's utilizing the gyms if there was an audience or seating in terms of parents, if it's a 7th grade band program. And then we have a video for this one. So this is Wyoming way down here, and so we're starting to look at the entrance to the middle school. You'll see those 2-story classroom wings on both sides, and the entry is in the center. The sort of terracotta color element, that's that library space as it extends over the top of the administrative offices. You'll see that bus loop on the side. As we come around to the north, this is just more 2-story classroom areas and education spaces. You can see facing Wheeler Way, the sign Blackhawk Middle School. The large element in the center, as we come around this corner, that's those gyms being in the center. And then we get to the 1-story piece over here, which is that Gompers Elementary entrance. So it's really taken that 1-story part of the building and bringing that down to the younger learners. So the building doesn't feel so daunting to them as an entrance into the elementary school. As we go around to the east side, you'll start to see how the education spaces and sort of the topography of the site and how it kind of works its way down the building. So this first group is those 4K and K classrooms, so our youngest learners. And then as the topography falls off to the south, that's where you start to see that 2-story stack of classroom and education spaces. And you come back around to the south, and that's the Blackhawk Middle School end. But incorporating glass on the south face in a responsible way that also captures that view through the grove of trees that's in the.
Right, any board member questions? Board member Mosner Falcom?
Thanks. Did I see on the 4K and K wing there, classroom exits to the outside?
So that's the littlest learners, that is an exit out of their classrooms. Because they don't want to travel through a lot of the building. We also will have age appropriate playgrounds in those areas. And so makes it a little more safe and convenient for them to go from their classroom to the playground and back in.
So I love it. I was glad to see that.
Yeah.
It's pretty standard in a lot of our kindergarten classrooms around the district. Not all, as buildings have changed, but there are a lot of classroom exit doors right from the classroom.
Yeah, get those kids outside. I love it. Cool, thank you. That was it for me.
Okay, board member Muldrow?
Yeah, so I asked this in our last conversation around kind of when we have a school that is serving both elementary school students and middle school students, or both middle school students and high school students, is that necessarily two schools? And so I think one of the things that has been missing for me in the presentation is the max capacity of the school. So as our district grows, are these schools able to take on a larger population of students? How does that compare to what these buildings currently hold? And then I think the question is, you know, why do we want these to be, why is this building not a K-8 school versus two schools? Why is this building have two administrative teams? And I think that gets to a larger question around, what does it mean for some middle schools to have 300 students and others to have 700 students? And obviously you get an assistant principal, those sorts of things, but really when we're getting into how we're sizing and supporting our schools, when you have that kind of variance across the district, I'm wondering kind of how we explain our approach in terms of those sites.
Scott, you want
Yeah.
to address?
So capacity starting us 365, current enrollment's about 310, 320. So 365, we open the door, and it has the ability, once we remove locker spaces and convert them, you'll add 25 more kind of the ideal classroom sizes. So we go to 440 pretty quickly without much construction work. And if you start increasing classroom sizes, start to grow that to near 500 on the Blackhawk side. On the Gomper side, we started out at a design criteria of 240. Right now it's about 200, so a little more students. We also know there's development, there's 4K in the area, there's lots of childcare desert. So we increased the capacity of Gompers to 290. So it gives us the ability to add 4K to flex 4K in kindergartens to adapt to that community spaces, but also future growth of all the developments that are coming around that area to give us that opportunity to grow. Plus, we have other locker spaces as well, and places to expand where it can become 330, 40 by moving some of those built-in extra spaces in that building to.
Do we anticipate that students from elementary schools in the surrounding areas, there's a few elementary schools nearby, that we might see parents go, actually, I would drive my kid the extra 6 blocks so that they can go to one of the newest elementary schools in the city? And is there a concern around what that means for the enrollment at those elementary schools that are maybe awaiting kind of our next referendum in order to access the same kind of facilities update?
Yeah, and I know we've had those conversations with Cindy and the group about, you know, does it open opportunity for more DLI different school? Or how does that look? So there's a big, you know, boundary in looking how that may affect it all. And obviously, other schools that are aging in that particular area as well. It's opportunity for us to.
I look forward to discussing this further.
All right, board member Saravo.
Thank you, board member Castro. The board member Feltham, you made me think about outside spaces for the elementary schools, and I know some parents have asked, are we looking at fences for the elementary students, because the slowest learners are often the fastest runners?
Yeah, keeping the runners in bay, yes.
Okay. Oh, and are you guys, like, when it comes to the outside, like playground equipment and stuff like that, is that something that's being talked about in, like, within the school? Or are you like leaning into the Madison Parks Department to see what they've been doing around Madison, or who is?
Yeah, so we have our similar designs we have now, for personal design, right? And also working with the city as well as we're seeing updates and stuff like that. So it'll be a big discussion when it comes to outer side. We actually have, I think it's Thursday, we have that meeting talking about what does the outside look like and how does it shape to our community and what's the needs of our community.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Okay, I think we can move last on.
I'll take the last couple slides briefly. I know it's a marathon for folks, so appreciate it. Just the kind of the next steps, right? So this is the big overall project timeline we've talked about for the presentation. We're still on target. 2026 started that. We start diving into phase 2 as we're starting to build on phase 1. Every year progresses forward. We're still on target. Some upcoming community engagement events for our phase one schools, starting heavily in September. We are starting to do that DD information with our staff, our students, our community is, let's really start to dive into the last few weeks before we get the instruction prints. Let's get that last set of input. Let's make sure we hit the targets as we need to, and they're fitting what our community needs. We'll have updated design updates for what's going on, and then phase one school construction comments and everything happening in July, December 9th and 10th. Next, we are working towards respectful exits. So that'll be another community thing we'll start working with our group over the next year. Is how do we put our old buildings to rest? What are things that we can do? How can we do tribute videos? How can we bring former members of our staff, our students, our community? What do they want to see? How do we do it? Do we bring conservations? Do we pick up things that go to our new schools? Do we bring highlights of what these schools brought to our community? And really doing some fundraising and some events around them to really highlight, like, this is a chance to kind of put it towards where it's going to be, how it's repurposed and what its feel is going to do, leading us into the next phase of MSD being Destination City. And then next, big date, March 20th is our groundbreaking ceremony for phase one schools. Coming very, very, very quickly.
Y'all not excited?
They're just worn out. March 20th, the Friday before spring break, they will have a ceremony at each of the schools, one prior to lunch and one right after lunch. Encourage everybody to come in and join us in celebrating this new event for our new schools in phase one. Pat?
Hey. And any further questions?
Scott, I just want to say on behalf of our entire MMSD community, Concord, OPN, Findorf, Vogel, I know I had to leave. You know, I've been involved in this work, but to see it presented in this way tonight, it's impressive. You know, knowing that we're on a really good pathway to do this work in a real high quality way. Of course, there are going to be questions and things that come up in the community, but I feel like we've demonstrated that we're poised to meet those challenges and explain how we're going to best position us to do the very best with what the community charged us with. So well done to all of you. And I just wanted to say that I appreciate the efforts of everyone.
Thanks, Dr. Other. Thanks to the team. They're doing a great job.
Thanks for your time tonight.
Thank you.
I think we can proceed to the final item on the agenda.
So we're gonna jump right into a few more items in terms of consideration for this ad 25. Essentially no changes to the assumptions or from our May operation report. And so we can kind of hop through some of the slides, Jesse, to get to just a couple more. Fairness of time. Right there. It's good. So it's critical in terms of revenue limits and enrollment. We're going to continue to talk about it as we have. We are on a scale of slightly increasing the last 2 years. And so the projections that that I provided in May is what we're going to keep for the preliminary budget in June. And that is assuming 86 FTE increase for revenue limit purposes for next year, for Friday, September of 2025. That's a critical assumption to make. I think our second Friday count has been revised upwards, but I think for our purpose of where we are at for the budget, we'll keep it at an 86 FTE increase on the revenue limit side, which is a combination of counts. And then we'll monitor that as the summer goes on, and then we take these registrations, which will obviously impact the fall budget. We'll update it at that time, but we're going to stick with the projections of 86 increase, slightly increases our revenue. But that's no change from May. So just see if you want to continue to go through one, and then that's just the timeline that we talked about and shared before. This is the projection that we are going to continue to go with. The projection, as a reminder, shows about a $39 million increase in
terms of the total revenue limit picture in 25-26 compared to 24-25. In terms of new revenues above what we had this current year. And that's really based on that 86 FTE estimate. On the next slide, we continue to believe we will be at about $50.3 million in state aid. That's the way the formula works today. So that brings us to really the few more items we want to talk about. A couple more slides, Jesse, in terms of the priority and equity projects. And so next slide, Jesse. We're gonna want to talk a little bit about just a summary, and I'll just stay on this. If you have questions, Jennifer can ask more. But the ads from the main operations work group for the consideration would be appropriate this into the June budget vote at the end of this month as part of the preliminary budget. Is the motion the board approved at the May board meeting with the building-based substitute teachers creating 10 new FTE teachers at an estimated cost of just under $1.2 million. That's what the board approved. And then I believe Cindy is online to discuss the expansion of the early college opportunities. And then Rachel and Jennifer will talk about an increase of our current estimate, which we had in May was $490,000. Our increased property is going to be a little bit more than that. So we need to incorporate that additional 78,000 on top of 492,000 that's already in our projections for the budget. All right, Jesse, we're gonna go to one more slide. And this is the continued expansion. Cindy, are you on?
I am, Bob. I'm here. You want me to talk about this slide?
Yes.
All right. Good evening again, board members. A reminder around some of the early college opportunities that we currently have in our district for students. We have our early college STEM Academy, which has 200 students. We have an early college education academy that started this year that has about 10 students. And then we have other opportunities called Start College Now, an early college credit program. Start College Now is part-time opportunities at Madison College, and early college credit program are part-time opportunities at a four-year university. Most of our students access UW-Madison. And we are hoping to continue expansion of these early college opportunities. And there's two pieces to this ask. One is tuition increases over at Madison College have happened. You might recall when we brought forth a new MOA for these new academies, we moved from a $6,500 per student to a $7,000 per student. So we have increased costs for tuition. And then we want to continue to grow academies. So next year we will be offering a biomedical academy for students to really support both the growing tech field that we have here and the biohealth tech hub that the state of Wisconsin was awarded. Networking and cybersecurity, so the back end side of IT that we've been talking a lot about that we're going to start offering in our middle schools through CTE. This would be an opportunity for students to earn a certification through an early college academy. We have a Running Start Academy, which is really a liberal arts opportunity for students that are interested in like a liberal arts transfer. They can get started early at Madison College in their senior year. And then additional seats for our early college credit program, which is access to part-time opportunities at our four-year universities, and for us mostly UW-Madison and or Edgewood. I thought it was important to also put in some of the data that we shared with you back in October or November of last year that shows the impact that early college is having on our students. The number of students we've been able to serve, the number of enrollments, the number of college credit attainment, and also the cost savings for our families. One last reminder is last school year, the 23-24 school year, 61% of our students graduated high school with some college credit, and that is due to these type of early college opportunities that are being afforded to our students. The ask, as you could see here, is to expand the need for $850,000. I will turn it back over to Bob and I'll be available for questions when that time comes.
Thank you, Cindy. So the next slide then, I believe Rachel's gonna talk about the increases in our property casualty insurance in terms of, so I hand over to Rachel.
Sure. Good evening, board members. So, this slide describes what's changing in our property and casualty insurance premiums. So that includes, a variety of different types of insurance that we buy. This year, we spent about 2.6 million. We're expecting that that's gonna go to about 3.1 million. That's about a $570,000 increase. What we've listed there are those insurances that are going up the most. You can see there, property insurance is going up 9.8%. And for the most part, this reflects our claims, our risk, but it also reflects a couple of other things. For example, with the property insurance, our property values went up significantly, partly because some of our buildings are bigger, so we have more space, but also property values themselves are going up. We've all felt that. So that is part of the reason for that property increase. General liability insurance is going up almost 20%. Again, inflationary increases are part of that, but also some of it is our new facilities. As we have more offerings to the public, more sporting events, things like that, our liability increases there. So that is what's going on there. The auto insurance, almost 18%. A lot of that is market-based. Just it's a lot more expensive to fix cars and replace cars and our automobiles. The excess workers' compensation is going up 8.3%. That's primarily a reflection of increases in our payroll. So as payroll goes up, our workers' comp costs increase. The 207% in the educator's legal liability, that's a little bit deceiving. So we used to, our primary legal liability premium actually went down, but that's because we had to switch carriers. Market in this area is tightening up. And it has been for a couple of years, getting harder for school districts to get this kind of coverage. Liberty Mutual no longer offered that to us this year, so we had to go out to the market to get additional coverage. Our primary coverage, which provides $1 million, that premium is actually lower than what we were paying. But because Liberty Mutual is not covering kind of our catastrophic or our excess coverage anymore, we had to go out and secure additional excess coverage. You're not seeing it because that excess coverage was previously under our umbrella policy. So it's a little bit misleading, the 207%. We just cannot call out how much of our umbrella policy that premium has been reduced. I know that's a little confusing, so please, if you have any questions, let me know. But basically, we have to have different insurance carriers now for our legal liability. So that's what's going on there. In addition to all of these costs, we just wanted to point out that we do pay workers' compensation correctly, and we're estimating that's going to be about 1.9 million in additional claims costs above and beyond the 3. Any questions? I know that was a bit much.
Board Member Mr. Falcon.
I have 2 questions. One is, I thought that we approved not having like the work comp, that we self-pay that. So I'm confused to see that here.
So we do, that's what the 1.9 million is.
Right,
That's
I
the
get that
self-insured
part.
piece.
Yep.
And then we have excess coverage on top of that. So if we have catastrophic claims, that's that excess layer on top.
Okay. Okay. And if I like went back and read the motion that we approved back when about how we don't do work comp coverage and instead do direct like self-pay, like would that be clear in that? Like I'm just like kind of confused about why we approved this thing that said we do self-pay and we also have this other thing. And I'm not confused about why. I'm confused about why I didn't understand that from what we approved before.
It's typical when you are self-insured to also purchase catastrophic coverage on top of that to limit your overall liability.
Okay.
I'd have to go back and look and see how that was explained, but that is pretty typical regardless of the type of insurance or risk you're trying to cover.
Okay.
Is usually you do have some sort of catastrophic coverage on top.
Okay. And my second question is the potential budget impact listed is 78,000, but the increase listed here is 570,000. So maybe this is a Bob question, like what's why?
So, when we talked about this at the May operations work group, I was estimating, Rachel and Jennifer and the team, that it would be about a $492,000. So in terms of us building the budget 25-26, I already have counted for 492,000, and then the difference is the 570.
Understood. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, and I'll just add to that, these, at the time that Bob put together the projections last month, we were just in the last week or so getting kind of the final bids from different carriers, so that's why the numbers have moved.
That makes sense to me. Thanks for the info.
Further questions? Thank you, proceed.
Right, so, the next slide, Jesse. So the revisions from the earlier last two operations work group in terms of fine tuning some of the estimates, puts us at just under 37 million, this additional 2.1 million. If you're looking at an increase in 25-26 compared to 4.5 of the $39 million as the finishing touches for the 25-26 preliminary budget that we would present to you for the June meeting. What that means is it would be a slightly larger draw on our general fund. Proposed budget last month, we were estimating about $9.5 million that we would need to use our fund and balance. This 2.1 would add on top of that, so it'd be probably 11.6 million. We'll continue to refine the actual cost as we put the budget together, but it's a pretty good place where we're going to be for the preliminary budget to start the July 1 year. And of course, the major factors that will impact all that. What happens with the state budget, 25-27 state budget, in terms of if we'll be any increased state aid, and then final federal budget as it continues to develop, and see what happens. Those are our two biggest cards that I'll be looking at as we go after the June budget vote towards the fall, the final vote in terms of. But now there's just if we can go forward, this is no change. Yeah, here we go. So the other change that has happened since the May operations work group are really twofold. The City of Madison assessor has put out their estimates and their projections for 2025 in terms of the average City of Madison home and total assessed value increases. I had projected about just under a 5% increase in terms of total equalized value for May based on the information that we had available at the time. But as I said, since then, the city assessor has put out projections in terms of 2025 values. And it has caused a couple of things. One, me to re-estimate our projected total equalized value, still property value, but just recorded a little bit differently. In May, I was projecting just under a 5% total increase on our property values. The numbers now stand in terms of what I'm projecting an increase to be just under 8%. Property values continue to be robust. That's a good thing in terms of our total property value going up. It allows us to tax rate less because value has increased. We won't get the final numbers that will be used to calculate the tax bill until fall of 2025, which is normal. So we have to do some projecting at this point in time. Bottom line, with that increase, that value, and then the final amount in terms of the average home value, which we'll talk about at the next slide. Overall, however, with the increase of almost 8% in terms of life value, puts our mill rate at 10.24, or just over 1 mill rate increase, which is 11.5% increase in terms of tax rate. That ends up being average city of Madison home. If you want to go to the next slide, Jesse. If you look to the bottom corner right, small numbers, but it's a 729 estimated projected increase on the average city of Madison home, which has been valued now by the city assessor's office at $480,300. It's slightly higher than the projection had. I was using last May, waiting for the report to come out, and then using that estimate at the time of a historical timeline and kind of projecting forward. But the 481,300 is the lockdown value for a average city of Madison home, and based on the decisions to date in terms of the estimates on permits, the property that talked about it puts a tax bill on the average city of Madison home of $4,926.53, which is a $729.11 increase compared to last year's tax bill on that average city of Madison home. As I said, we'll get the final value in the fall, and we'll know what the state budget is, and we'll have our picture for the federal budget. And then we'll also have our actual counts for student enrollments for the third Friday in September. That'll all impact the budget. But I feel pretty good in terms of our estimate right now on our budget to have set the path of where we're going and go in terms of it. So that's kind of where we're at. And then we'll continue to monitor the Let's Talk. We'll continue to keep you informed as the summer moves on with the state budget in terms of what ends up actually being in that budget. And the hope is, as I always continue to be optimistic, that the state will step up and start doing a more equal share of the cost of public schools. I'm an eternal optimist, really. Sometimes it doesn't come through, but I am. But that's where the budget is today. Any questions on that?
All right, the board member questions. That's the preliminary budget for the vote on the preliminary budget in June. Okay. Oh, board member Mulgrew.
Given these updates, I am curious about how unknown factors are continuing to inform the process at this point. So in relationship to both the state and federal government, it seems like we have a pretty firm understanding of where we're at locally. Not asking anybody to like have a crystal ball, but wondering how the rest of that is coming together at this point.
Yeah, so the preliminary budget, the team has, we've straight lined our state aids, right? And so, which is what state law says, if the budget's not passed on time, we are to assume we get the same level of state aid that we have in 24-25. So if we get more state aid, that will drive down the property tax impacts, right? So we won't levy as much. We'll have the state covering those costs, and then property tax impacts will go down. So that's the hope, but until it happens, we have to keep the budget here, and these are the projections that so.
I greatly appreciate that. My last question in relationship to this is, how does this budget reflect an investment in the Board of Education itself? So I've advocated both for an increase in terms of the board's stipend, which has not happened the entire time I've been on the board. Over the course of 6 years, board members are paid or compensated in stipend about $8,400 a year. And also access to healthcare for our entire board. And part of the reason I find this investment compelling is that I've been on this board for 6 years and I've worked with 12 different board members. And so there is a sense that it's really hard to sustain this work, and also continuity and leadership matters. And so I am curious about how that's been factored into the preliminary budget at this point.
Board member Mulco, Chair Castro, President Nichols, I think that The concerns and questions you bring up are good ones, and I do think that with direction from the board, we could provide some compensation comparisons to start to give an outlook on this that would drive any additional budget considerations that we might take. You know, with your direction and with your ultimate approval, both on compensation for board members and also the viability of health insurance and what those costs would be. Our team, our administration would be happy to provide that information directed from the board.
I greatly appreciate that. I think there is both the ability to compare us to other boards across the state of Wisconsin, and there are some really, there are boards that receive no compensation.
Correct.
There's also the ability to compare us to other local bodies of governance in which we are the lowest compensated in comparison to city council and the county board. I think in terms of the healthcare aspect, I would look at the model that Long Beach has had. And one of the reasons I'm inspired by their model and approach is just because of the longevity of their board. So they're able to bring people into a highly competitive electoral process and maintain their leadership on the board through investment in the board itself. And so I hope we get to explore that, but I think maybe the conversation I need to have is with my fellow members. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Board Member Nichols? Okay.
Well, I guess the question is, board member Muldrow. Thank you for bringing that up. I would be in support of us having some additional information. For timing's sake, we'll vote on the preliminary budget in a couple of weeks at our June 23rd meeting. Are you hoping that we would have information prior to that June vote, or at least no later than the October final vote? Sorry to put you on the spot. I'm just trying to think.
No, I really appreciate the
Yeah.
question. I want to have a realistic expectation. I think this is a conversation that's been a long time coming.
Yeah.
And so I want to do it in a way that allows our administration to research it and do their due diligence thoughtfully, that also allows for us as a board to have a conversation around what feels reasonable. I do want to say that part of what drives this is that our board, percentage wise, in comparison to other bodies of governance, is one of the most diverse boards in our community or in the state of Wisconsin, and is also one of the most dominantly folks who identify as women. And so by not compensating us in alignment with other local governance bodies, we're actually contributing to the wage gap. We're actually paying people of color, women, less for work that's being engaged in throughout our community by bodies that have less diverse. I think the work we do is tremendously important. I don't know where we're gonna land in terms of the conversation, so I don't want to rush it.
Thank you. Having said that, may I get a
So moved.
turn? Okay,
Second.
yeah, all those in favor?
Aye.
All right, we are adjourned.
5-minute break between meetings, please, Chair.